I remember when the sky changed color. Not all at once, nothing in the Imperium ever happens cleanly, with clear demarcations between before and after. The change was gradual, a creeping wrongness that took weeks to register in official channels and months to filter down to those of us who lived in the mid-levels of Hive Tertius. I was a junior lexicographer in the Administratum's Astropathic Interpretation Division, 3rd class, which meant I spent my days translating the fever dreams of psychers into actionable intelligence reports, or trying to. Most of what came through was garbage metaphorical nonsense about weeping sons and children made of screaming glass. We were trained to extract meaning from madness, to find the wheat among the chaff, to serve the Emperor's vast bureaucratic machinery with diligence and precision. The first report I processed, that should have warned us, came from a mining world, designated 447 Tertius Secundus, in the Ghoul Stars region. The astropath had died in the transmission, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the consistency of the imagery. 12 separate psychic communiques over 3 weeks, each from different astropaths across 4 subsectors, all describing the same thing. Green lightning erupting from beneath stone, metal men with eyes like funeral pyres, entire populations vanishing between one breath and the next. I filed them under Xenos activity, probable Ork incursion, and forwarded them to the appropriate military liaison office. The forms were completed in triplicate. The stamps were properly applied. My duty was fulfilled. I lived alone in a hab unit, approximately 4 meters by 6 meters, with a reclamation sink that produced rust-colored water and a sleeping pallet that smelled of industrial solvent, no matter how many times I cleaned it. My name was Carolus Fenn. I was 28 standard years old, and I had dedicated my life to the God Emperor's service, with the understanding that this dedication would consist primarily of reading, interpreting, filing, and occasionally testifying about the mad visions of psychers whose brains were slowly burning out from the inside. It was not glorious work, it was not the work of heroes, but it was necessary. And necessity was its own virtue in the Imperium of man. The dream started 3 months after I filed that first report. I would wake in the darkness of my hab unit, my mouth dry, my skin cold, despite the oppressive heat that perpetually filled the hive's lower middle levels. In the dreams, I walked through corridors that were not corridors, spaces too geometric, too perfect, angles that hurt to perceive, even in sleep. Green light pulsed in rhythms that felt like language, like meaning hovering just beyond comprehension. And there were figures, tall and skeletal, moving with the precision of clockwork, but the presence of something ancient and terrible. I would wake with my hands cramped into claws, as if I had been trying to ward something away. I was not the only one dreaming. In the 3rd month, I began to notice patterns in the astropathic reports. The imagery was spreading. Mining worlds, agri-worlds, shrine worlds, fortress monasteries on the edges of known space, all reporting similar phenomena. Metal men rising from beneath the ground, technology that predated human understanding, weapons that unmade matter with beams of emerald radiance, entire populations harvested, converted, or simply deleted from existence. The reports used different metaphors, different symbolic languages depending on the astropath's training and mental architecture, but the underlying reality was becoming impossible to ignore. And then the communications began to fail. Not all at once, not dramatically, just, slowly, sector by sector, world by world. The astropathic choir began to go silent. At first, we assumed it was interference. Solar flares, warp storms, the usual disruptions that plagued faster-than-light communication across the Imperium's vast distances. But the pattern was wrong. The silence spread outward from specific points, like ripples in water, like infection through flesh. I charted it on my personal cogitator, unauthorized and dangerous, but I needed to see it, needed to understand what was happening. The map looked like a disease. Hundreds of points of origin, scattered across the galaxy, each one a spreading circle of communicative darkness. If I overlaid it with historical data from the Departamento Cartography data I absolutely should not have had access to, but obtained through a sexual liaison with a clerk in archives, whose name I've since forgotten, the pattern became even clearer. Every point of origin corresponded to a known or suspected tomb world. Worlds where ancient xenotech had been discovered. Worlds where mining operations had reported strange metallic structures deep beneath the crust. Worlds where, centuries or even millennia ago, exploratory missions had encountered something old and hostile, and then, through bureaucratic incompetence or deliberate suppression, had been forgotten. The Necrons. I knew the word, though it was not one we were supposed to use. The official terminology was unclassified xenoform, probable mechanical origin, threat level, extremis. But everyone who worked in Xeno's intelligence knew the real name, whispered in break rooms and over drinks in the mid-level cantinas. The Necrons were the ghost story of the Imperium, the ancient horror that lay sleeping beneath a million worlds, waiting, except they were not sleeping anymore. They were waking up. All of them. Everywhere. At once, I should have reported my findings, should have brought my unauthorized research to my supervisor, submitted the proper forms, waited for the proper channels to assess and respond, but I had worked in the administratum long enough to know what would happen. My data would be filed, reviewed, kicked up to the next level, and the next, and the next. It would take months, perhaps years, for anyone with actual authority to see it, and by then, whatever was happening would have long since happened. The Imperium's great weakness was not its enemies, it was its own bureaucratic inertia, the grinding slowness of a system so vast and complex that it could barely turn to face new threats. So I kept my mouth shut. I went to work. I filed my reports. I translated astropathic visions of green death and skeletal conquerors into dry, procedural language that would be read by clerks, who would forward it to other clerks, who would summarize it for administrators, who would never act on it in time. And at night, I dreamed of walking through those impossible corridors, green light pulsing in rhythms that felt like counting down, like a timer reaching zero. The first visible sign came 4 months after my initial report. The sky above Hive Tertius changed. We lived under perpetual smog and chemical haze, the atmosphere so polluted that the sun was only a dim suggestion behind layers of industrial exhaust. But one morning, I woke to find green light filtering through my hab unit's narrow window. Not bright green, nothing so obvious or alarming, just a faint verdant tinge to the usual brown-grey murk, like a bruise forming on reality itself. No one mentioned it. Not at first. We were trained not to acknowledge anomalies until they were officially recognized. To do otherwise was to invite censure, investigation, or worse. So we went about our duties, pretending not to notice that the sky was the wrong color, that the light hurt our eyes in ways that had nothing to do with brightness, that the air tasted faintly of ozone, and something else, something metallic and ancient. The convoys started disappearing next. Hive Tertius relied on constant shipments of raw materials, food paste, water reclamation chemicals, and processed goods from the surrounding industrial zones. These convoys ran on precise schedules, maintained by the Departamento Munitorum, with the kind of obsessive efficiency that kept planets like ours functioning. When the first convoy failed to arrive, it was noted but not alarming. Mechanical failure, perhaps, or an accident. When the second failed to arrive, questions were raised. When the third, fourth, and fifth convoys all vanished without trace or explanation, panic began to set in. I was in my office, processing a report from an astropath on a shrine world 3 subsectors away. She had died mid-transmission. Her final words, something about the harvest moon rising at noon, when the first riots started in the lower hive. I heard them as distant thunder, a rumbling that traveled up through the hive's structure, vibrating in my bones before I heard it with my ears. The Vox network was immediately flooded with conflicting reports. Food shortages, Water riots, Arbeits enforcing martial law, the governor's palace issuing reassurances that were transparently lies, and then the power started to fail. Not completely, the hive's main reactors were buried deep in the lower levels, heavily shielded and redundantly protected. But the distribution network began to malfunction, lights flickered, cogitators went dark for seconds or minutes at a time. The climate control systems that kept the mid-levels at merely oppressive temperatures instead of lethal ones began to sputter and die. I sat at my desk in the darkness, listening to the emergency sirens wail their three-note song of disaster, and thought about the map I had made. The spreading circles of silence. The tomb worlds waking. We were on a tomb world. I realized it with the clarity of revelation, though it was really just logical deduction from available data. Hive Tertius had been built on the ruins of some earlier civilization. The administratum records were vague, but there were references to pre-compliance structures deep beneath the lowest levels, sealed away and forgotten. Structures that were old when humanity was young. Structures that were not human at all. They were rising. I understood it now. Rising from beneath us, from beneath all of us, on every world where they had slept. The Necrons were not invading. They were reclaiming. This was their galaxy first, and they had simply been asleep while we infested it like mold on forgotten bread. Now they were awake, and they wanted their property back. I abandoned my office. Not officially, I simply stopped going. The administratum was too consumed with its own collapse to notice one missing junior lexicographer. The transportation systems were failing, making it difficult to reach the mid-level offices anyway. The hab blocks were becoming fortresses, residents barricading themselves inside against the chaos spreading from below. I spent my days listening to the Vox network, to the fragmentary reports from other hives, other worlds, other sectors. The pattern was everywhere. The silence was spreading, and in the silence, something was moving. The refugees started arriving in the third week. Not from off-world interplanetary travel had effectively ceased when the orbital platforms went dark, but from the lower hive levels. They came in waves, thousands of them, hollow-eyed and starving, speaking in broken fragments about what they had seen below. Metal men walking through walls, green lightning that dissolved flesh but left clothing, and metal intact. Entire districts emptied in minutes. The population vanished. No bodies, no blood, just empty streets, and the smell of ozone. The Arbeits tried to turn them back, to contain them in the lower levels, but there were too many. The flood became a tide. The tide became an ocean, and we drowned in their numbers, their fear, their testimony. I interviewed one of them, an old woman who had worked in a reclamation plant on sub-level 89. Her eyes were strange, not damaged, exactly, but focused on something beyond my shoulder, beyond the wall, beyond the material world. She spoke in a monotone, her words carefully articulated, as if she were translating from another language in real time. They came through the walls, she said, not breaking them, through them, like the walls were water, like the walls were lies. They moved in formation, perfect lines, perfect spacing. Their eyes were green fire. When they looked at you, you knew. You knew they were seeing something else. Not you, not human. They were seeing matter, atoms, the stuff you're made of. And they were deciding whether it was useful. What did they do? I asked, though I already knew. I had read enough reports, seen enough astropathic visions. They pointed, she said. Just pointed. And people came apart. Not exploded. Came apart. Like they were never put together properly in the first place. Like the universe was correcting an error. There was green light, and then there was nothing. No screaming, no pain, I think. Just transition from is to isn't. She laughed then, a sound like glass breaking. We ran. Those of us who weren't corrected. We ran up through the maintenance shafts, through the ventilation systems, up and up and up. But there's nowhere to run, is there? Because they're not just down, They're everywhere, under everything. This whole world is built on top of them. We're living on their grave, and they're standing up. The Planetary Defense Force tried to mount a response. I watched from my HAB unit window as troop carriers moved through the mid-level streets, heading toward the descending ramps that led to the lower hive. They were well equipped by Imperial standards lasguns, flak armor, some light armor support, a chimera or two. Brave men and women doing their duty against an enemy they couldn't comprehend. I watched them descend into the lower levels in the afternoon. I watched the survivors return 3 hours later. There were perhaps a dozen of them from a force of 300. They did not speak. They did not report to their officers. They simply walked away from their vehicles and their weapons and kept walking out into the hive until they disappeared into the crowds of displaced refugees. The ecclesiarchy organized a prayer vigil in the shrine of the Emperor's eternal vigilance, a massive cathedral in the mid-level's central district. Thousands attended. They sang hymns and prayed for deliverance, for the Emperor's protection, for the intervention of the Adeptus Astartes, or the Imperial Navy, or anyone with the power to save them. I did not attend. I stayed in my HAB unit and listened to the Vox broadcasts of the ceremony. The Archconfessor's voice, hoarse with passion, as he called upon the Emperor to smite the Xenos, to protect his faithful, to demonstrate once more his divine power. The cathedral collapsed during the vigil. Just collapsed, straight down, as if the ground beneath it had suddenly ceased to exist. Later, reports fragmentary, confused, contradictory, suggested that the survivors had seen the floor opening, had seen green light pouring up from below, had seen figures rising through the rubble and dust, figures that moved with mechanical precision, figures that began the harvest. The death toll was estimated at 15,000, though estimates were becoming meaningless. Death was everywhere now, uncountable and constant. The Vox network began to degrade. Static filled the channels, punctuated by screams, by prayers, by fragmentary warnings that cut off mid-word. I sat in the darkness of my HAB unit, the power having failed completely 2 days prior, and listened to the death of communication, to the silence spreading. I thought about the astropaths, burning out one by one across the galaxy, their minds unable to cope with what they were seeing, what they were feeling through the warp. I thought about the map I had made, the spreading circles of darkness. I wondered if anyone, anywhere, was coordinating a response. If there was anyone left to coordinate, I suspect not. The Imperium was too vast, too slow, too consumed with its own internal machinery to respond to something like this. We were designed to grind forward, to maintain, to endure. We were not designed for rapid adaptation, for coordinated galaxy-wide response to existential threat. We were a bureaucracy armed with faith and lasguns, facing an enemy that had ruled the stars when our ancestors were still figuring out fire. The water stopped flowing on the 37th day. The reclamation systems had finally given up, overwhelmed by the chaos below, their operators dead or fled or vanished into the harvest. I had perhaps 3 days' worth of water in recycled containers. After that, dehydration. After that, death. It seemed absurd to die of thirst while the world ended around me. But that was the reality. The grand apocalypse was composed of countless small, mundane deaths. I decided to go down. Not to fight. I had no weapons, no training, no illusions about my ability to affect anything. But I needed to see, needed to witness. If I was going to die on this world, in this hive, I wanted to understand what was killing me, needed to look the ending in its green-lit eyes, and acknowledge it. The descent took hours. The transit systems were dead, the lifts unpowered, the conveyors silent, and still. I walked down maintenance stairs, through abandoned checkpoints where Arbite's armor lay discarded, past makeshift refugee camps now empty of refugees. The deeper I went, the colder it became. Not the cold of winter or void, something else. A fundamental cold, as if heat itself was being negated, erased, corrected, out of existence. The lower hive was a tomb. That was my first thought upon reaching sub-level 50, halfway to the foundational levels. The streets were empty but not destroyed. The buildings stood intact. There were no signs of battle, no last burns on walls, no blood staining the rockcrete, just emptiness, absolute and total, as if the population had simply been removed, sorted out, eliminated from the equation. Green light pulsed in the distance, down one of the main thoroughfares. Rhythmic, regular. I walked toward it, my footsteps echoing in the silence, my breath visible in the frigid air. The light came from a fissure in the street, a crack perhaps 20 meters across that had split the roadway open like rotten fruit. I approached the edge and looked down. The structure beneath the hive was vast. I saw it in glimpses, in the spaces between the pulsing light, and my mind struggled to process what my eyes were showing it. Architecture that was simultaneously geometric and organic, mathematical precision wed to an aesthetic that predated human concepts of beauty or function, corridors that extended further than the hive's foundation should allow, chambers the size of cathedrals, filled with machinery that hummed with power, that moved with purpose, that served functions I could not begin to guess at. And the Necrons. I saw them now, clearly and undeniably. They were tall, perhaps 7 feet or more, skeletal frames of living metal that moved with eerie fluidity. Their eyes burned with that same green fire, bright enough to leave afterimages. They moved in formations, in patterns, carrying out tasks with the efficiency of machines, but the purposefulness of living beings. Some were repairing their own structures, metallic limbs reaching out to seal breaches in walls, to reconnect severed power conduits, to restore their tomb to function. Others were carrying object cylindrical containers that glowed with internal light, stacked in precise pyramids in the vast chambers below. I watched one of them pass directly beneath my position, perhaps 50 meters down. It was carrying one of those cylinders, and as it moved through a patch of brighter light, I saw what the cylinder contained, a human being, compressed. Not crushed, not destroyed, but somehow reduced, condensed, packed into a space far too small for a body. The figure inside was still alive. I could see movement, could see the chest expanding and contracting in what might have been breathing or screaming. The metal skeleton paid it no attention. It was just carrying its burden to wherever such things were stored, catalogued, filed away for whatever purpose the Necrons had for harvested humanity. I backed away from the edge. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short, sharp gasps that crystallized in the freezing air. I wanted to run, wanted to flee back to the upper levels, to pretend I had never seen what I had seen. But where would I run to? The upper levels would fall too, were probably already falling, in their own time, in their own way. The Necrons were not in a hurry. They moved with the inevitability of geological processes, of tectonic shifts, of entropy. They would reclaim every level, every structure, every human habitation, and they would process every human being into those cylinders, pack us away like files in an archive, like specimens in a museum of what once lived here. I found a vantage point in an abandoned administratum office on sub-level 45, and watched the harvest progress over the following days. I had no food, very little water, but I discovered that terror was its own sustenance. That witnessing had its own terrible energy. The Necrons moved up through the hive in waves, systematic and thorough. They did not hurry. They did not communicate, at least not in any way I could detect. They simply moved from level to level, structure to structure, room to room, and anything living was collected, compressed, stored. I saw them take an entire hab block. They emerged from the walls simultaneously, appearing in every unit at once, as if they had been waiting inside the structure all along, as if they were as much a part of the building as the support beams and power conduits. The residents had nowhere to run. The harvesting took perhaps 10 minutes. Then the Necrons withdrew, carrying their cylinders, and the building stood empty, silent, waiting for its next purpose. There was no fighting, no resistance. What could resistance look like against this? How do you fight an enemy that walks through walls, that points at you, and you simply cease to exist in any meaningful way, that moves with the precision of programmed reality? The few attempts I witnessed were almost pathetic. A PDF squad with a heavy bolter, setting up a firing position at a stairwell junction. The Necrons walked through the wall behind them, touched them with metallic fingers, and they stopped. Just stopped. Froze in place, perhaps stored in whatever quantum prison these creatures used before they bothered to compress and containerize you. I began to see patterns in their movement. The Necrons were not random. They were not mindless. They were executing a plan, following some vast design that existed in mathematical precision within their ancient machine minds. They worked from the bottom up, level by level, clearing and claiming and converting. They established nodes positions where their strange obelisks would rise through the floors, green crystal structures that hummed with power and seemed to accelerate the harvest around them. Once a node was established, the surrounding area would empty within hours, and then they would move to the next level, the next district, the next target. I had become a ghost, I realized. Moving through the abandoned spaces, drinking from recycling tanks in empty buildings, eating spoiled rations left in evacuated storage rooms. I was alive because I was not worth the effort to harvest. Or perhaps they simply had not found me yet. Perhaps I was living in the narrow window between waves, the temporary grace period before my level was processed. The dreams changed. I no longer saw the corridors, the green light, the skeletal figures. Instead, I dreamed in mathematics, in equations I did not understand, but could feel, like a language spoken in the architecture of thought itself. I dreamed of the galaxy as they saw it, a resource to be reclaimed, a corrupted system to be reformatted, an infestation to be cleared. Humanity was not an enemy to them. We were not even a problem. We were an error, an incorrect variable in a calculation that should have resolved eons ago. In the dreams, I understood. They had ruled this galaxy 60 million years ago. They had fought wars that reshaped reality itself. They had defeated gods and broken the laws of nature to achieve immortality. And then they had gone to sleep, waiting for the galaxy to cool, for the warp storms to pass, for the younger races to exterminate each other and leave the stars quiet and ready for reclamation. But something had gone wrong. The sleep had lasted too long. Systems had degraded, and when they woke, they found their galaxy infested with vermin Orks, Eldar, Tau, and worst of all, humanity. Billions upon billions of humans, spreading like plague across worlds that were rightfully theirs. So they were correcting the error. All of them. Every tomb world, every sleeping dynasty, every buried legion. They had awakened simultaneously, perhaps through some signal I could not detect, perhaps through some countdown that had finally reached zero. And now they were taking back what had always been theirs. I climbed to the upper levels on the 53rd day. I had to know if anything remained, if there was any part of the hive still functioning, still fighting, still trying to survive. The ascent was brutal. I was weak from hunger, from dehydration, from the accumulated stress of watching the world end one systematic harvest at a time. My muscles ached, my joints burned, but I climbed, level after level, through the darkness and the cold, following the maintenance shafts and emergency stairs that the Necrons had not yet needed to clear. The upper hive was burning, not with natural fire with green flame, with energy that consumed without heat, that dissolved matter into component atoms and scattered them across probabilistic space. I emerged onto a viewing platform and saw the skyline transform. The towering spires that had defined Hive Tertius's silhouette were gone or going, melting into streams of light that flowed downward into the fissures, into the tomb below. The sky was green now, fully green. The atmospheric processes corrupted or converted or simply erased. The air tasted of electricity and something else, something that might have been the flavor of non-existence. There were still humans alive up here. I found them in a fortified sector near what had been the governor's palace, perhaps 1,000 people, defended by the last functional PDF unit, and a handful of Arbites, who had not fled or died or gone mad. They had erected barricades. Not against the Necrons. Barricades were useless against enemies that walked through walls, but against other humans, against the desperate and the violent and the insane who emerged from the burning districts looking for food, water, or simply someone to die with. I tried to tell them what I had seen, tried to explain the harvest, the cylinders, the systematic processing of the lower hive. They did not want to listen. They clung to hope like drowning men clung to debris. The Imperial Navy would arrive. The Space Marines would answer the distress calls. The Mechanicus would deploy their god machines. Help was coming. It had to be coming. The Imperium would not abandon them. I laughed at that, a sound that was almost a sob. The Imperium was not abandoning them. The Imperium simply did not exist anymore, not in any functional sense. The Imperium was communication networks that no longer functioned, supply chains that had collapsed, bureaucratic systems too slow to recognize their own death. The Imperium was 10,000 years of accumulated inertia slamming into the wall of Necron awakening and shattering into 1,000,000 fragments. The end came on the 61st day. The Necrons reached the upper levels not as an invasion, but as an inevitability. They emerged from the floors, from the walls, from the air itself, as if reality had simply decided to correct itself and produce them where they were needed. The PDF fired their lasguns until the power packs ran dry, then used bayonets, then fists, then died or froze or were compressed into cylinders. The Arbites fought with shock mauls and riot shields and were swept aside like children playing at war. The civilians screamed and ran and were collected with the same systematic efficiency as everything else. I stood in the center of the fortified sector and watched them work. 3 Necrons, tall and skeletal and beautiful in their terrible perfection, moving through the crowd with purpose. Point, compress, store, point, compress, store. The process took seconds per person, a green beam from their fingertips, a flash of light, and the human form folded in on itself. Impossible geometry made real, until a full-sized person occupied a cylinder perhaps 30 centimeters long. Some of the cylinders shook. Most did not. I could not decide which was worse. One of them approached me. Its eyes burned with that green fire, and I felt it looking at me, through me, seeing not Carolus Venn, junior lexicographer, but a collection of atoms, a pattern of matter, a resource to be processed. It raised one metallic finger, and I felt the beam touch me, felt reality begin to compress around me, felt my body folding in ways that should not be possible, and then it stopped. The Necron tilted its head, a gesture that was almost human in its curiosity. It lowered its hand, it turned away from me, and moved to the next human, continued its work, left me standing there untouched. I do not know why. I have spent the time since trying to understand, trying to find meaning in that moment of mercy or malfunction, or simple disinterest. Perhaps I was damaged in some way, broken by the dreams, corrupted by too much exposure to their emanations. Perhaps the compression process had started and failed, left me in some quantum state between collected and uncollected. Perhaps I was simply not worth the storage space. I am the only survivor in Hive Tertius. I know this now, after walking through every level, every district, every abandoned street, and empty building. The population of 40 million has been reduced to 1. The Necrons have withdrawn, descending back into their tomb, taking their cylinders with them, leaving the hive as empty architecture, a monument to absence. The machinery still functions, the power has returned, the water flows, the air recyclers hum with renewed efficiency. But there is no one to use it, no one to maintain it, no one to give it purpose. I have accessed what remains of the Vox network. Broadband, tight beam, astropathic relay nodes, all still functional but empty. I have sent messages to every frequency, every channel, every possible recipient. I have heard nothing in response but static and silence, the same silence that I charted months ago on my unauthorized map, the silence that has consumed the galaxy. The Necrons awakened everywhere. I understand this now, not as invasion, not as conquest, but as awakening. They simply stood up, everywhere at once, and began to reclaim what was always theirs. How long has it been? 61 days since they emerged in Hive Tertius. But time is becoming strange. The clocks still work, but they no longer seem to measure anything meaningful. Days blend together. Nights are indistinguishable from day under the green sky. I sleep when exhaustion takes me. I wake when the dreams force me awake. In the dreams, I see the galaxy now. See it as they must see it. A map of reclamation spreading outward from millions of tomb worlds. Green circles expanding, touching, merging, until the entire spiral is painted in the color of their resurrection. I see humanity's worlds going dark one by one. Fortress worlds and shrine worlds and hive worlds and forge worlds. All harvested, all processed, all filed away into cylinders, and stored in vast repositories beneath the surface. I see the Space Marine chapters fighting and dying, their enhanced bodies compressed just like everyone else's, their faith and fury worth nothing against an enemy that does not care. I see the Mechanicus's machines turned against them, corrupted or converted, or simply shut down by technology that treats their most sacred mysteries as primitive tools. I see the Ecclesiarchy's cathedral standing empty, the prayers echoing in darkness, the God-Emperor silent in the face of gods who actually died and came back as machines. I see the Imperium ending, not in glory, not in apocalyptic battle, but in systematic processing, archived, filed, stored away like records of a failed experiment, and I am alive. Still alive. Walking through the empty hive, eating from stores that will last decades, drinking water that flows clean and cold from systems maintained by no one. I am the last human on this world, and perhaps one of the last humans in the galaxy. I do not know why I was spared. I do not know if spared is even the right word. Perhaps I am being preserved for some purpose I cannot comprehend. Perhaps I am an experiment. Perhaps I am simply forgotten, an error in their processing, a file that was misfiled and will eventually be found and corrected. I have begun to compile a record. Using my old lexicography skills, my training in translation and interpretation, I am documenting what happened here. The timeline, the methodology, the systematic nature of the harvest. I am writing it in every language I know, in code, in metaphor, in plain speech. I am copying it to every functional data node in the hive, encoding it in power fluctuations, hiding it in the architecture itself. I do not know if anyone will ever read it. I do not know if there is anyone left to read anything. But I am doing it anyway, because it is what I am trained to do. I record, I interpret, I file, I serve. The dreams are becoming more vivid. I understand more of the mathematics now. Not enough to replicate it, not enough to resist it, but enough to see the shape of what is happening. The Necrons are not destroying humanity. They are storing us. Every compressed cylinder contains a human being in some form of suspended animation, preserved at the moment of compression. We are being archived, whether for study, for resources, for eventual release, or simply because they do not believe in waste, I cannot determine. But we are not being eliminated. We are being filed away. It is the most administratum way to end. The Imperium, with all its bureaucratic obsession, with its endless filing and cataloging and processing of information, has been outfiled by an enemy that treats reality itself as paperwork to be processed. We tried to contain the galaxy in forms and reports and categorization. They simply do it better. I laugh sometimes, alone in the empty hive, thinking about this. The sound echoes off the walls, comes back to me distorted, almost like another voice. I wonder if I am going mad. I wonder if madness even means anything anymore. The green sky pulses at night. Rhythmic, regular, like a heartbeat, like counting. I lie on the floor of my old hab unit and watch the light filter through the window, painting geometric patterns on the ceiling. The patterns are beautiful in a way that hurts. Mathematics made visual. Order imposed on chaos. Perfection that has no place for imperfection. I have stopped trying to send messages. There is no one to receive them. The galaxy is silent, except for the hum of Necron machinery, reactivating across 1,000,000 worlds, beginning the work of reclamation that will take centuries or millennia. They are patient. They have already waited 60 million years. They can wait for their harvest to complete. I wonder what they will do when they are finished, when every human has been compressed and stored, every Ork exterminated or preserved, every Eldar caught and filed, every world cleared and restored to whatever pristine state they remember from their ancient empire. Will they wake the other Necrons? The ones still sleeping? Will they rebuild their civilization? Will they look at the cylinders in their repositories and wonder what to do with all these stored lives? Or will they simply file us away forever, maintaining the archive without ever opening it, preserving without purpose, storing what they cannot use and will not release? I do not think I will live to see the answer. I am weakening. The food stores are adequate, but my body is failing in ways that food cannot address. Something happened during that moment when the Necron tried to compress me. Something broke or changed or shifted. I can feel it now, a wrongness in my cells, a corruption in the pattern that defines me. I am coming apart slowly, unraveling like bad code, like a file corrupted at the fundamental level. I will die in this empty hive, surrounded by functional machinery and flowing water and powered lights, alone in a city built for millions. I will die knowing that my entire species has been archived, compressed, and stored away. I will die as the last free human in a galaxy that no longer belongs to humanity. The irony is not lost on me. I spent my life filing reports, translating visions, documenting horrors in dry procedural language. And now, I am the report. I am the vision. I am the horror that someone, someday, might document, if anyone remains to do the documenting. The dreams are constant now. I no longer know if I am awake or asleep. The green light fills everything. The corridors stretch away into infinite geometric perfection. The mathematics sing in frequencies beyond sound. I walk through their tomb, our tomb now, and I understand. I see what they see. I feel what they feel. Nothing. Pure, perfect nothing. No emotion, no fear, no hope. Just the clean satisfaction of systems functioning as designed, of processes completing, of order restored. I was Carolus Venn. I was 28 standard years old. I served the Administratum, Astropathic Interpretation Division, 3rd class. I processed reports and filed paperwork, and translated the mad visions of psychers into actionable intelligence. I did my duty until duty became meaningless. I survived the harvest that took everyone else, and now I am dying in an empty hive under a green sky, the last human on a world that has forgotten what humanity was for. The Necrons awakened everywhere, and everywhere we were filed away, archived, processed, stored. The galaxy is silent now, quiet and orderly and empty, perfect, just as they designed it 60 million years ago, when they first went to sleep and left their automatic systems to maintain their tombs until the awakening signal sounded. The signal has sounded. They are awake. We are archived. The galaxy belongs to them again, cleaned of infestation, restored to purity, ready for whatever purpose they have planned for it. And I am dying, alone, in the dark, in the green light, in the mathematics, in the silence, in the tomb that was once my home.